Welcome members to Place at well, I think it's the best board in Calderdale. You are live on YouTube, so as always, keep it PG. Subs, we don't have any subs today. Members' interests. Does any member have an interest in any of the items? No. Sometimes I park in Calderdale, but I don't think that's a relevant interest. No. Okay. Admission of the public. Yes, we're on YouTube. Minutes of the last meeting. Does anyone have any points to raise about the minutes? We are actually signing off the ones on the 14th of May and the 4th of June. No. Can we have a proposal that they are a true and accurate? Yep, Dave. Can we have a seconder? Josh, all in favour? Yeah, very good. Right, passed. Minutes are done. Item number 5, COVID. So we've got Mark and Zora to discuss the new normal here. Kirsty, could you bring Mark and Zora in, please? And Zora, are you two the only officers here, or would you like anyone else in? Because I know we've got Sarah.
No.
Perhaps. Yeah, sorry.
No, I think for this item it'll just be Mark and I, but obviously colleagues can come in if needed.
Perfect. Councillor Scullion as well. I'm not. If you wish to join the discussion, you're more than welcome, and Councillor Press as well. Okay, so this item, the new normal, I think this item was really intended. We've seen a lot of change over lockdown. You know, a lot of it has been tough, but there's been some positive change as well. It's mainly to analyse that change and see, moving forward, if we can do anything differently, and indeed embrace the change as a positive thing. So really, over to Mark and Zora, if that's okay.
Okay, I'm not sure, Chair, how much detail you want me to go into. So I thought it would just be helpful if I gave you initially a summary of how we led the response and how we're now looking at our stabilisation phase, and then touch on what's happening internally, and then pass over to Mark, who, along with the leader and deputy leader, is actually leading the recovery group for Calderdale. That's okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of the overall response, you'll be aware obviously that it's a partnership response. It's not something which is just led by the council. We work with partners across public, private and community and voluntary sector as well. There's been a huge amount of work that's gone on during that period, whether that's been actually helping with food parcels, helping collect prescriptions, making telephone calls to people who are isolated, and so it goes on. So as we're moving into more of what we're calling the stabilisation phase, we're looking at 5 work streams altogether. One work stream which is about safer spaces and transport, safer workspaces, safer care, safer communities and safer education. And clearly, as we're moving into the stabilisation phase, we're starting to see how some of those areas are developing within the recovery phase, which is very much focusing on our economic regeneration and how we can help and support our market towns and villages to start to thrive again. I think in terms of the stabilisation, looking at it at the moment, there are 3 issues that we're focusing on just in terms of where we are here and now. The first one is shielding, and members and colleagues will be aware that shielding officially comes to an end at the end of July. And what we're doing is working with partners and the community and voluntary sector to better understand who those people are and what those ongoing needs, both in terms of ongoing support and indeed ongoing anxieties that may exist with that group of people when that official formal government support is withdrawn, and what we might need to do in the interim to help those people actually start to live a normal life. So that's a piece of work that's ongoing. The second issue, if you like, that we're focusing on at the moment is the home to school transport. and how we might resolve that as we move towards September, particularly if social distancing remains in place, and how we'll actually be able to practically resolve that issue as all of our young people go back to school. And then looking at the final issue that we're currently focusing on, you'll be aware that this Saturday we're seeing the relaxing of some of the lockdown restrictions, and there's lots of comments in the media about calling it Super Saturday or other such things, and we're working very closely with partners to make sure that firstly we're able to support our hospitality trade as it starts to reopen, but secondly to try and make sure that we can do that in a safe way so that people are actually able to enjoy themselves safely without putting themselves or others indeed at risk. And we're working very closely with both the licensed sector, with police colleagues and across community protection to try and make sure that we have a reasonable relaxation this weekend. I'm aware there's a couple of hands raised.
Yeah, I'm guessing, Roger. I think it's because there's a bit of interference on the line, Zora. However, I can hear you fine. There is a bit of interference, but Roger, have you got?
It's purely and simply 2 weeks tomorrow I retire for good, but I drive home to school transport, and I just feel that should be recorded in case it conflicts with an interest. That's all it was.
That's no problem, Roger. Yeah, could we note that, Kirsty, if that's okay?
Thank you.
Sorry, Zora. Back over to you.
Okay, so I've moved a bit closer to the microphone. I don't know if that's actually improved it at all. Okay, so that's where we are in terms of the stabilisation phase. And I said those 3 key issues that we're currently focusing on. Of course, there's a lot more that we're considering at any given time. I'll probably pass across to Mark at that point to talk a little bit about the Calderdale Recovery Group. Then I could come back in and answer any questions, Chair, if that's okay.
No problem, Zora.
Okay, Chair. Would you like me to kick off?
Yep, over to you, Mark.
Firstly, let me introduce myself. I'm Mark Cole. I'm the Interim Director for Regeneration and Strategy, and I know some of you in this particular session, but not all of you. So I thought I'd start by introducing myself. So in terms of the recovery process, I've been asked by the Chief Executive to be the lead officer on that particular piece of work, and that means that I'm not only working on the Calderdale recovery piece, but also linking in with officers across West Yorkshire and working on the Wicker economic recovery plan as well. So effectively, Calderdale has established a COVID-19 recovery coordination group that is chaired by the leader, and also the deputy leader sits on that group as well. And we are also involving key partners, including the police, Together Housing, as well as private and third sector representatives. The intention is for this group to link up to the regional priorities being developed by the West Yorkshire Economic Recovery Board, which I've already referred to, as well as identifying Calderdale specific issues that are key in achieving an inclusive recovery and delivering the wider vision for Calderdale as a place that is enterprising, talented and distinctive. The work of this group will both inform and be informed by the activities being led by the head of finance on the shape of the future council. So effectively this stuff hopefully is starting to link together between what Zora's also talked about in terms of the immediate work, but together towards the longer term work for Calderdale as a place, but also for what the local authority will look like going forward. In terms of effectively what that involves in specifics, I think basically the Calderdale recovery work will have 3 main phases. The first phase, which is effectively from now through to October, is the stabilisation work, which Zora has already referred to, so I won't cover again, but only to say that that work is being led by the gold and silver partnerships, and therefore that work is reported to the Calderdale Recovery Coordination Group, but actually led by Gold and Silver partners. The phase 2 of the recovery process we are calling review, and that will run from effectively now through to December, and that will have effectively 3 main key focuses or foci. The first is completing a COVID-19 impact assessment, so we get a better idea of not only how COVID-19 pandemic has affected the UK nationally, but what are the particular effects on Calderdale as a place. That work is currently ongoing, and we're hoping that to have effectively a draft impact assessment by the end of July, beginning of August. Once that work has effectively been completed, we will then use that as a basis of a wider engagement with the community and business community in terms of actually starting to shape what a new normal will look like for Calderdale. And I know that was a key part of what you wanted to talk about this evening. And I think we're very clear that we're not going back to the old normal, but I think there is less clarity at the moment in terms of what the new normal will look like. But obviously a key part of that is it needs to be shaped by residents and the business community going forward. And that work will probably start at the beginning of September and run for a couple of months, so that we are, if you like, engaging with, probably using the format of the Calderdale conversations to really start to sit down with residents and the business community to identify what is a shared vision of what the new normal will look like for Calderdale. The COVID-19 impact assessment work, together with that shaping of the new normal, will both form the basis of effectively a Calderdale inclusive recovery plan, which will probably be wider than the Wicker economic recovery plan, in as much as it will cover the place piece rather than just being completely economically focused. And we are hoping to be in a position to both complete and launch that inclusive recovery plan in December of this year. And then that will be the start of effectively the third phase of the recovery work, which we are calling Rebuild. And that will start effectively in January 2021, and will focus very much on implementing the inclusive recovery plan recommendations and actions. And happy to pause there, Chair, and take any questions that you or the panel may have.
Thank you, Mark. We're covering some ground and we're only 13 minutes in. It's great. I'll pass on to Councillor Press, Councillor Scullion, in case you want to say anything, and even Sarah, if you want to chip in as well, no problem at all. So
I've got to say that I was a little taken aback in a conversation this afternoon to be told that even by the end of the year we would probably still be meeting in this format, which was a little bit disheartening, but there we go. We've got to keep people safe. I just wanted to say something about Saturday, when obviously we're going to see the reopening of many pubs and restaurants, and I suppose some people are going to be really looking forward to that, and some people are actually going to be really dreading it. I suspect there are some members of our team, our community wardens and some of our police who are not especially looking forward to this one, because it's going to be, I think it's going to be quite a tough challenge. But the message that we actually put out a message today to explain, we've visited every single one, I think it's 800, over 800 licensed. We've been in touch with over 800 licensed premises in Calderdale. We're specifically visiting ones which we think will cause us particular challenges, and we've made it absolutely clear to licensees that they've got to be COVID ready before they can open. Within that, we're doing our best to facilitate, if we can, extra outdoor provision. So we've reduced the cost of, this is under government guidelines, we've reduced the cost of a pavement licence from £300 to £100. So to help business, really, we are keen to help business, and as we've seen today, more announcements about chains going bust and so on. So we've done that. At the same time, we're not going to be allowing businesses to operate outside if it's obstructive, if it's unsafe, and we'll be, and Andrew would have more details on this, but we'll also be telling people they cannot put up tents, gazebos, that kind of thing, just because that they could be a hazard. As councillors, we're all going to be, I suspect, we're going to have loads of emails and inundated with questions. One thing the police are not going to be able to do is go to every single place where there's a social distancing problem. It's really, they'll be there to deal with any criminal activity, but it's really up to the communities, to people as individuals, to keep themselves, to be sensible. No, it's hard, probably more than most, to be sensible, to keep the social distancing, and to keep each other safe. So we don't know. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that if Saturday is the start of the new normal, we have no idea really quite how it's going to pan out. But I wanted to reassure people that our officers and our team, and Zora's been heading up on this, have been working really hard for this moment in the COVID journey. And we're hoping that people will listen to our message, that people will stay safe and people will be responsible. But there is no magic influx of extra police or anything like that. And we're working with the resources we've got. We've got the community wardens on standby. So that's how it's going to be on Saturday. And we'll see how it goes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Councillor Press. Councillor Scullion, do you have anything to add?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to come back to what Zora and Mark said about the recovery group. We're meeting frequently. It's a dynamic meeting. Things are changing. And of course, we're mirroring in some ways what's been done at the West Yorkshire Combined Authority level. And at the moment, as Zora said, it's between the emergency blue light sort of situation of Gold and Silver Command, excuse me, where we're still dealing with people who are ill, people who are going into hospital, people who are ill at home, and potential outbreaks. And as Councillor Press said, let's hope that Saturday passes off smoothly. And we're moving into that first stabilisation phase, and then on to review, and then on to rebuild. And in some ways we vary in that recovery group with our partners like the College and the Chamber of Commerce, Health Service, Police, etc. And we vary between discussing the minutiae of, do you tape up every other men's urinals when you reopen the public toilets, or do you only open those that have got cubicles? That sort of minutiae, to much more strategic and longer term things in terms of thinking about what about the graduates of 2020, the young people leaving school and leaving college and coming back to stay with their parents. And what does that mean really in terms of things like economic policy and trying to make incubator spaces available for startups? It also means thinking about how we are age friendly in the future. How do we make life in Calderdale bearable and indeed a good life for people who are over 70? And how do we actually capture some of the fantastic work that people have done in the community hubs and generally the strength of what we've done to support each other in that time? So there's a range and a breadth to the group. I wanted just to basically pay tribute to our own staff who've in different ways stepped up to the plate, but also the fantastic number of community volunteers and people who've helped enormously. But we're into this new phase, towards this stabilisation phase. Until we get a vaccine, we will be living with this virus, and that has all kinds of consequences and implications. I wanted just, Chair, to finish by saying something about the finance. There was an announcement today from Robert Jenrick, the Minister of State, for communities and local government, housing communities and local government, about some financial help for councils. That is extremely welcome. We've been working all day on what precisely that means for Calderdale in terms of what we can look at, and I will have an update at Cabinet on Monday in terms, if we get some of the further detailed information. I'll have an update in Cabinet on Monday in terms of what the financial position will be as we move towards stabilisation. Thank you, Chair.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Scullion. Sarah, do you want to come in if you've got anything to make a note of, or?
Nothing at this point, Chair, no. If anyone's got any specific questions about my service areas, I'm happy to answer them.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to take members first, if that's okay. I know Councillor Lee wants to come in at some point, but I'd like to give members of the panel the first opportunity to question. I think that's only fair. And then I'll bring in Councillor Lee later on. Members, do you have any questions to ask? Yep, Councillor Kavanagh. Sorry, you're on mute.
No, sorry. I wanted to ask about the recovery plan in terms of the quality impact assessment around certain groups that might have been disproportionately impacted. So the Women's Budget Group did a really good report on the impacts of women. So even though men have been more physically affected by COVID, women have disproportionately been affected economically. So younger women are more likely to be working in industries like restaurants, pubs, cafes that have closed down. Women are more likely to be in part-time work and are more likely to have been made redundant. And women are more like, lone parents are more likely to be women. So just thinking through what the recovery plan looks like for different parts of the community that might be experiencing COVID-19 in a very specific way.
Over to officers. Yeah.
I think the good thing about actually doing this COVID-19 impact assessment is that we will start to get a much better understanding how COVID-19 has affected different groups within society in different ways. So although we're very early days into it, we know, for example, that young people are going to be disproportionately impacted. Because I say effectively, there's a lot of young people leaving and trying to join the labour market, but there's also been significant impacts on apprenticeships and indeed training. So we know already that the information is telling us that different groups within society are impacted in different ways. So we will start to pick up some statistical evidence around those different impacts. And we know that BAME communities are also disproportionately affected, for example. That will form the basis of the engagement with the community around the idea of Calderdale conversations, which are not new, but again, we will use those statistics to have that informed conversation with the communities, and we will obviously learn more as we go through that process, and those things will start to feed into and be reflected in this idea of an inclusive recovery plan. But I just wanted to assure you, Councillor, that yes, we do understand that it is affecting different sections of society differently, and certain sections are impacted greater than others, and that will be fed into the recovery plan.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark and Councillor. I should also note as well, I'm happy for Mike to come in at any point, because I know Mike is very interested in the new normal. Does any other councillor have a question? No. Well, in that case, oh yes, Councillor A. Smith. Sorry, Councillor Smith, you're very small on the screen.
I'm on my phone. I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you for the report. It's really interesting. I think I want to know how are WICA going to deal with the reduction in the number of people allowed on public transport, because that is a huge problem. Are there any plans to increase the number of buses? Because I suppose it's a juxtaposition between being safe and then going back to polluting the environment with an increased uptake in car driving. And some people don't have the choice to drive a car as well. So the question is, are WIC actually making a plan to increase the number of buses?
Perhaps again, Chair, I'll pass that one over to Stephen Lee if you are happy with that, because he's closer to that detail than I am.
WIC, yes, Chair, through you, I can confirm that WIC are in conversation with government about increased number of buses. Government have also instructed that despite the fact that the current buses are only able to carry a certain element, subsidies and indeed increased subsidies should continue to be paid to the operators to try and facilitate that movement to greater service provision. One of the discussions which is going on around other elements of the bus service is that in order to achieve any degree of capacity, the social distancing measure would need to be reduced to about 0.9 metres rather than the 1 metre or 2 metres, depending on which area you look at, that's currently being recommended. So yes, I think the short answer is those discussions are ongoing, Councillor.
Very good. Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Fenton-Glynn.
Hi guys, thanks for the report. I'm kind of looking at what we've covered in the report. It kind of feels like there's 3, maybe 4 elements to this. So there's the impact on the Calderdale economy, and obviously the more general economy. There is building back and what can be learnt from this time. There's the various other communities that have been impacted. And then there's the very specific questions about those who are still at risk in health and care. And I'm almost at a loss as to how we can kind of cover all those in one thing. And I'm wondering, maybe moving forward, whether we need either a special meeting of this board or another board to actually, to kind of keep an ongoing look at the COVID recovery, because it feels like there's just far too much to look at in this conversation of this size. The thing that I was kind of thinking about, and it might just be that this isn't something that we've done any work on, well, not that we've not done any work on yet, but that we don't have anything concrete on yet, is specifically the impact on the care sector. They're the people who've been particularly impacted by this, but also I think a lot of our care providers have been struggling both to support staff who've had to shield and to make sure that they're able to continue doing their work. I'm just wondering, in terms of I know it is one of the largest uses of resources that the council have. Do we anticipate this having a impact on the sustainability of our care sector? And are there any significant changes to our contracts that we're then going to have to perhaps find funding from other places? I know that's quite a broad question, but I'm afraid it's quite a broad area.
Chair, I'm not in a position to answer that question specifically because it does fall within Ian Baines's area of operation, but I am happy to take on board and provide a written reply to that question if that's okay with you, Chair.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
I am muted. Okay. Just really 2 very brief points. We all talk about the care sector and the NHS and care workers, and no one denies that they are doing a great job. But the delivery drivers, everybody's now gone to mail order, and those drivers are working something like 15 hours a day. If they didn't do that, where would we be? And there's another point about public transport. I can only speak in my last few weeks at First Bus that they have limited seats In other words, if you're in a double decker, you can only have 19 people. If you're in a single decker, you can only have 11 people. So they're all trying to do the best. But they're also, just for Councillor Fenton Glynn, they have actually, as I understand it, put on more routes. And of course, they're not making any money out of this. If you can only get 11 people on a 56-seater bus, how the hell are you going to make a penny? So just bear in mind, everybody is trying to pull together as best we can. Right, I'll be quiet now.
Does an officer want to respond to that? Or I don't know if it was intended as a question or... No. I'll go over to Councillor Stephen Lee. Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Okay, just a brief point, please, Chair. The Conservative group on the council have not been offered a place on the Calderdale Recovery Coordinating Group. This may be an inadvertent omission, but I think in the interests of taking account of all sectors of society, as alluded to by Mark Cole, there ought to have been an invitation to the Conservative group to have a seat on that group. And so I would ask through the chair that you kindly submit to the Scrutiny Board a recommendation that the Conservative group should be represented on the Calderdale Recovery Coordinating Group. Thank you.
Is that one for Councillor Scullion to respond, possibly? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. And I hear what Councillor Lee is saying these have been, as people keep saying, unprecedented times. We have been in an emergency. That's certainly, that wider membership is something we will keep under review. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mike, have I got you going in?
Thank you, Chair. It was really just a comment about the organisation of the work, really. To pick up on Councillor Fenton Glynn's 2 points, I think. One is that the Adults Health and Social Care Scrutiny Board is looking at the care sector at its meeting in 2 weeks today, and is inviting both care providers, private sector care providers, and the CQC to join that discussion. So I think that Councillor Fenton Glynn talked about the breadth of the issues. I think there's a job of making sure that the different scrutiny boards sort of divide out that work and do it in the most appropriate place. And I guess Councillor Robinson said earlier on, I'm interested in the new normal. I'm interested in the new normal, but I'm actually interested particularly in your discussions in how that fits in with the discussions that Councillor Fenton Glynn and Councillor Robinson had a few weeks ago about the work of this scrutiny board over the autumn, really, and how that might both scrutinise what Cabinet and senior officers are doing, but also contributes to helping that work along as well. So I think in your work programme discussions, and probably after the meeting tonight, there will need to be some more discussion to shape your work programme and the work programme of the other scrutiny boards to ensure that this breadth of issue is picked up.
Indeed, I think on the back of that, I'll ask a question as well. Regarding home working, everyone's working from home. I know that everyone will be working from home for the foreseeable future, let's be honest. My questions are, working from home as a council workforce, how has that affected council services, do you think? And also the second question off the back of that, if they have not affected council services, can we see a reduction in council real estate, which will then bring in revenue for the council? That's just 2 questions from me. Not sure if Mark or Councillor Scullion, possibly, not sure.
I think Mark was trying to unmute himself. I'll be the warm-up act. I mean, the answer is yes, we are thinking about all those things, but Mark has got more.
I mean, I think it's not a simple question to the first part of your question there, a simple answer, I should say. It's affected different services in different ways. So I can only talk for the Regeneration and Strategy Service. I think all our teams are, or the vast majority of our teams are working from home and have been doing so for the duration. And it affects different teams in different ways. But I know, so I won't get into the details, but in some respects, some services are actually more productive. Some are struggling in terms of just the logistics around, if you're working in highways and transportation and planning, access to printers to print A0 maps, for example, is problematic. But I think so, and I think it's also really a little bit too early to say it's been negative or positive. I think we're starting to get some feedback in terms of how it's working. We're doing staff surveys, so we're actually getting, if you like, impact from the staff and their experiences. And again, I think it is varied from those people who have room to create a home office, for example, who don't necessarily have simultaneous childcare responsibilities. So I think it's a mixed picture, and it's impossible to draw any, if you like, immediate conclusions in answer to the question, although we are looking very carefully at that. And in terms of how the experience of home working is going to impact on the council's office estate, and I think Councillor Scullion's already alluded to that, we are looking at, if you like, the extent of our office estate and what it could potentially look like in the future, reflecting reviews of what the new normal will look like. So I think that, to sum up my answer, it's very much work in progress at the moment.
That's fine. It's what I'd call an amber issue. Councillor Scullion, do you want to come back in?
Yes, I just wanted to say the staff and the IT support services done a fantastic job in terms of equipping people, and it would be wrong to think that everybody who works for the council has got a nicely set up home office. People are often working in, you know, their back bedroom or the kitchen or whatever, and sometimes that's difficult. And we're also concerned about the ongoing well-being of our staff, really, in terms of if you don't see your colleagues for months on end, particularly those staff that are in stressful jobs, social work and so on, need that contact, that supervision and that support. So we're very conscious of those well-being issues. And as Mark says, we're doing a lot of surveys and understanding what the new normal, what the future is going to be like. And I was passing on at the last meeting the experience of Yorkshire Water. The Chief Executive of Yorkshire Water, Liz Barber, was speaking about the survey they had done of their staff and asked them the question, you know, if all things were equal, would you like to continue to work at home? And she said that by and large, the response from the under 25s was that they wanted to come into the office, into the office. The response of, I think it was the over 55s, was they also wanted to come into the office. And maybe that's an indication of the fact that we older folk, that's working, isn't it? You go into the office. But actually for people with childcare or caring responsibilities and so on, quite a lot of them did not necessarily want to come into the office every day. And you can see the implications for that for the office estate that the council has. Not simply do we need the same number of offices, but are the spaces that we have within offices in terms of team meetings, touchdown points and so on, actually, so that the work that we're doing around the council's own office estate is looking at all of these issues at the moment. So I think it'd be a very interesting piece of work to come back to this committee, really, to take a further look at.
Exactly, and I think also, before I bring Zora in, we've got the further issue of decreased footfall in Halifax town centre, because if everyone's working from home, no one's working from Halifax, which means that, you know, no one's going to pop in to get a sandwich, no one's going clothes shopping in the lunch times. You've also got that added factor as well. Zora, would you final words to Zora.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch on something which Councillor Taylor, I think, raised initially, and that's about the people that have carried on working throughout this, whether those people are cleaning our streets, emptying our dustbins every week. You know, there's been a tremendous effort right the way through this lockdown period by staff of the council and of our partners. And I think it's just worth noting that we are still living with the virus, and actually we haven't gone back to normal. Every single task or job that is being done by a member of this organisation, or indeed other organisations, has had to have a new risk assessment done, a new way of working, just to protect the safety and well-being of the individuals carrying out those tasks, and of course the people receiving those services as well. So nothing's normal, nothing's straightforward, and everything, I think, is much more complicated. And we're going to have to live and adjust to those risks going forward as we actually start to revive some of our local villages and towns.
That's a really good point, Zora. And I think also additionally, we can't just think of things purely in terms of economics. There's also the societal impacts, for example, people using the parks. It's absolutely great, for example, when you're walking your dog. I shouldn't say that word because my dog might hear that word. But when you're walking your dog around the park and you see people just together, having coffees, just relaxing, I think that's a great thing. So it's also, how do we ensure that these places of well-being are taken into the future? I think that's a good point as well. Councillor Fenton Glynn, do you want the final words? Because I think you might have. No, perfect. Well, in that case, officers, thank you for a fruitful discussion. Thank you for coming along, and keep safe, keep alert. I don't know what the new jargon is, but thank you.
Pleasure, thank you.
Right then, in that case, next item is parking. Stephen Lee, are you there? Hello, Stephen.
I am, Councillor, but I was expecting Andrew to introduce this and then to pick up and go along with him. It's a joint report, as you know, between the two directorates. Andrew's led on it. We've done the strategy element of it. So, Andrew, if you want to introduce the report, I'm ready to assist as and when.
I just gave Stephen the hospital pass there. Andrew, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. The overall approach in this report is really about seeking to make sure that we manage the demand for prime parking spaces in town centres throughout the borough in such a way as to ensure that there's sufficient turnover and availability for people who are coming into the town centre as visitors, as shoppers, people who are going to spend money in the local economy, rather than those being taken up by people who are working in that local economy, who may well have commuted into a town centre, driven there in their car, and obviously want to park it somewhere. This applies to either during the day or the nighttime economy. There's a need to make sure that those people who can park in the more peripheral, less in demand areas, in some of the outer car parks, do so and leave those prime spaces in the town centres that are close by shops, restaurants, bars, all that sort of thing, as being available for those people who are using them. Now, clearly, things have changed dramatically over the last few months, but certainly pre-COVID, I'm sure members will agree that we were seeing all of the borough's town centres becoming increasingly buoyant in the evenings, at weekends, and on bank holidays. They were thriving to various degrees, and so basically those two things combined led to a report which, as you know, was presented to Cabinet at the start of last month, which recommended that parking charges be extended to evenings, Sundays and bank holidays in parts of the borough. Going over to what Stephen's just said. Obviously, what we want to do is have parking charges within the context of a wider strategy for how we deal with vehicles, how we deal with transportation generally in the borough, and that's why attached as an appendix is what I would term an emerging parking strategy based upon a number of principles, which Stephen, I'm sure, will elaborate upon if members so wish. So in summary, that was the reason for the report. Obviously, it was presented to Cabinet in June, and you as a scrutiny board have since called in Cabinet's decision.
Thank you indeed. This isn't a call-in, this is just it's just mainly like a consultation, so it's not a call-in of the decision. Stephen, do you want to add anything?
No, simply to say that, as Andrew says, we've got the framework of a strategy. Scrutiny may remember in previous years we've approved an existing town centre strategy. What we're trying to do is expand that strategy to cover the district as a whole. Obviously, each district centre has its own issues that need dealing with. But essentially, what Andrew's just said is absolutely correct. In as much as conventional parking policy is, if you consider 3 concentric rings, you've got high turnover, high value spaces in the centre of that. You've got low value, long term, long stay in the outer ring, and in the middle you've got something somewhere in the middle to cater for both. The expectation is that people that want to stay all day will sit in the outer area. People that want to access shops, etc., will go in the central area, and in many respects, that's what the strategy aims to ensure. There is a balance that the strategy tries to bring out between the cost of parking and the cost of public transport, which is a kind of an equalising measure. And there are various other hierarchies of parking, again, which we were looking at, as I say, different needs for different district centres. But that's basically the premise behind it, taking the existing strategy, ensuring that there is a supply of parking that's adequate to accommodate people's needs, and also ensuring that the supply of parking isn't underly cheap, so that it acts as a deterrent to people using public transport, which again allows us to respond to climate emergency and air quality issues. That's basically it, Councillor.
Thank you, Stephen. Over to Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, nobody likes putting up parking charges, and it's probably one of the most unpopular things we do. But just think, over the last beginning of the year, the first two months, we didn't get a penny out of parking charges because of the COVID-19. So we must have lost a lot of money on that. Now, one of the things in the report is that introduced bank holiday charges in Hebden Bridge and Halifax Town Centre. And I always thought it was strange that we didn't charge on bank holidays. I think when they did the peer review for the Highways Department, that's what several other councillors from other authorities said. So I haven't got a problem with that. But I think it's a bit sneaky putting the charges, extending the hours to 8 o'clock. I just think, because that's going to affect people who, well, when it comes to new normal, will actually be going into town and say from 7:30 or 7 o'clock, and have to pay parking charges. But I think at the end of the day, our loss of income over the first 2 months this financial year, it just crippled it. So we haven't got an alternative but to put the charges up. So I'm going to bite the bullet on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to officers about that. I know obviously you can't use parking as a revenue source, but do officers respond to that?
Yeah, I will, Chair. I mean, I think Councillor Young's absolutely right. I don't know how I ended up having responsibility for parking services, because it must be one of the most unpopular areas, as you say. Absolutely right, Chair, as well. This is not about generating income. Clearly, there are there are issues about the level of parking charges in order to try and equalise the demand and supply, as I talked about earlier. I mean, it is difficult in terms of the extending the charges, and I do take the point about, you know, somebody who might previously have just popped down to a local shop or something for half an hour at 6:30 is going to end up having to pay a charge for that half an hour visit. But also those people who have been parking sort of all day shouldn't be inconvenienced at all, because they, as Stephen has said and I've said, should be parking in the more peripheral areas, which this report doesn't propose to make any changes to. This is all about short stay parking, or short and medium stay parking, by which we mean parking that's for less than 4 hours. Those areas where people can park for more than 4 hours are unaffected by the proposals in the report.
Indeed, thank you very much. I've got Councillor Press who wants to come back on this.
Yes, I did. Just hang on. Just trying to. Yeah, I wanted to come back because I wanted to make it absolutely clear this is nothing to do with COVID-19. The reason this policy has been agreed is because it isn't a way of clawing back money because of COVID-19. It's because we had a peer review last year, and the other local authorities who came in were, to be honest with you, they were absolutely astonished at how little that we were charged. They couldn't believe how cheap it was. You know, that's the point, really, that these charges we felt were necessary to bring us more into line with other places. It's also always seemed to me bizarre that there are no charges for bank holidays, and indeed that as far as the 8 p.m. thing goes, I really don't understand why anyone would object to that. And also, I mean, let's put this in context. The other day, I forgot my bus pass. I was just going into Tomden and to do a bit of shopping, and I forgot my bus pass, and I paid £4.50 to travel into Tomden, and that's what actually people who don't have passes, that's what they pay. It's £4.50 to go on a 4-stop journey, a less than 5-minute journey to do your shopping. So people who use public transport don't have they don't have a situation where they can not have increases, and I might add far more significant increase and far more expensive than parking a car. And finally, it's also part of our strategy. We want to stop people using cars for 10-minute trips to the shops. They should be thinking about other ways of getting bits of shopping. We want to encourage people to walk or to cycle, and we need to do something. One thing the COVID is going to do is going to clog up the roads even more. So we've got a serious problem on our hands. So it's also part of our climate emergency strategy. So what I think are modest, people may disagree, but I think these are pretty modest measures. And I think not only it isn't actually about the finances, though obviously we have lost one hell of a lot of money because of COVID-19, but that really wasn't the point of the original plan, because it hadn't actually happened when we drew it up.
Fantastic, thank you, Councillor Press. We've gone from having no one who wants to ask a question to loads of people who want to ask a question. So if we could keep it quite concise, that would be appreciated. Councillor Fenton Glynn.
Yeah, I mean, I think the paper's relatively sensible. You know, while we don't raise revenue with parking, obviously it does go to the roads budget, and we can't, on the one hand, complain about the expeditiousness with which our local potholes are filled, and then be against paying for it. I guess the only two things I want to kind of know is, one, have we done much thinking about the impact of COVID and kind of the changes to transport use on this? just to make sure that, you know, our estimates are still correct. And I think the second thing would be just like, what's the best way we can use this to support other forms of transport, for example, cycling and walking, and just kind of encourage those spaces. It's not been without controversy that we've taken out some parking spaces in Hebden Bridge, but actually, when you kind of look at that, kind of if that is a longer term measure, then what are we going to therefore do to make it a bit easier for people to get down to Hebden Bridge in, you know, using other forms of transport? And, you know, is there anything that we can do kind of in tandem to make it a bit of a easier sell of, you know, yes, we are charging more, but we're also doing all this, and maybe some of the corridor improvement plans are part of that, but just kind of putting that out there.
Right. Stephen, is that?
Chair, I was just going to say I can respond to that if it's helpful. Yeah, so part of the COVID-19 strategy and part of what we're examining now in terms of long-term recovery is to facilitate easy movement of cyclists and pedestrians. And as Councillor Fenton Glynn said, that links in part back to what we're doing in the two corridor improvement schemes. But more than that, I think we all recognise that there has to be an alternative, and cycling and walking isn't the alternative for everyone. So what we're currently looking at as part of the devolution deal is control of bus services, so that we can put bus services where we want them. There is obviously a financial implication to that, and as Councillor Taylor said, the revenue that you achieve from bus services, or the revenue that the operator receives from bus services, doesn't necessarily cover the costs. So that is an additional thought. And in the longer term, which obviously doesn't really help the current proposals, but in the longer term, we're looking at mass rapid transit and how mass rapid transit can work to make that modal shift. And certainly where I live, which is the adjacent county, the ability of Metrolink to create that modal shift has been well demonstrated. So I think there are a variety of short-term, mid-term and longer-term measures that we're putting in place now to effect that shift away from cars, to give people that viable alternative. And it is important to recognise that that has to be there as part of a strategy. You can't just look to increase car parking charges to try and dissuade people from parking if you haven't got an alternative means of transport that's obviously available.
Indeed. Councillor Brian Smith.
Chair. I was late on. I was locked out of my council system. I had to go onto my private system. Just about the report. The report states that it's a Buddha-wide consultation. Yet Brighouse and Tomedy don't seem to be included in the report. I'm just wondering why. Have you not heard me?
Yeah, and Andrew. Yeah.
Yeah, I can probably answer that. The reason is that when the report was written, the on-street charges, because obviously we're talking about the on-street charges mainly here in Brighouse, were suspended because the council was in some discussion with local traders and the Business Improvement District through the Brighouse Town Board about how on-street charging in Brighouse should be approached at all. So we felt that it was potentially confusing to start looking at making adjustments to something that was actually suspended, because there were discussions about whether it was right that it was there in the first place. The second issue with Brighouse is, as you will know, Chair, there is currently a master plan being produced through the town board for the town, which has quite a lot of emerging views in it as to how the town centre might be recast to be far more pedestrian friendly, shall we say, than the sort of car dominance that is seen of certain parts of the town. So that was the reason why Brighouse was discounted. In terms of Todmorden, it's just simply that all of the on-street spaces in Todmorden are currently free. They are not charged for. So as this is a report that's about extending charges, rather than actually changing the level of the charges or the tariff itself, it wasn't appropriate to include either Elland or Todmorden because they currently don't have any tariff at all in their on-street spaces. I hope that helps.
Can I come back?
Yeah.
Surely that Andrew was going to look a little bit unfair to the rest of the community of Calderdale if Sunday charges are put on and evening charges are put on when it's not included borough-wide.
I'm not going to disagree with that, Councillor Smith. All I can say is that was the reasoning why they were not included in the original report. That does not mean, that in the future there could not be a similar extension in Brighouse, or indeed you may wish to suggest that as part of the consultation. But as I say, at the time the report was written, which is obviously some time ago now because it was considered by Cabinet on the 1st of June, we'd not yet resolved the position in Brighouse. But clearly it is the second largest town in the borough. And it is quite a vibrant town centre. It has a good mix of various retail outlets. So I'm not going to disagree with you. I've just tried to explain the reasoning that was in the original report.
Very good. Councillor Kavanagh.
I just wanted to make a comment about Josh already talked about behaviour change stuff, so he's probably covered most of what I was going to say, but I'm really excited about learning, and maybe it won't be tonight, but around the innovative ideas that we've got around getting people to move to active travel. And I think there's loads of things that we need to consider in terms of people who are really time poor and actually who need to do loads of little journeys, particularly people who've got childcare responsibilities. And what are the innovative things that we can do that may be around community solutions, around helping them to think through, maybe we don't want 10 people in the same neighborhood having to get to a school. Maybe there's other solutions. But I wanted to ask about workers, because I feel a bit sorry for them, because what we've said is we kind of want to get them out of those parking spaces, boot them out, get them on periphery. And actually I lived in London for 6 years and I cycled for 6 years, but when I got to work there was a shower, there was a cycle to work scheme, so I got an amazing bike really cheaply. There were loads of incentives I worked for different charities. All of them had brilliant incentives to get me to cycle rather than get on the bus or the tube. And so I'm just wondering, as a council, are we, and I know this currently is kind of null and void in terms of COVID, but if hopefully we get back to a solution where, a time where people are going into work, have we got plans to work with private sector organisations, our partners, around them incentivising the people that work for them to get the ones that can, commit to active travel to be able to do it?
Sure, I can take that. Yes, yeah. The answer quite simply is yes. I mean, one of the things that we're currently looking at is provision of additional cycling facilities in terms of on-highway facilities. And there will be a series of consultations that will take place with ward members over the next few weeks to look to increase that. Obviously, as an authority, we have got cycle facilities in the form of showers and changing rooms that Councillor Kavanagh described. and we are working as best we can with our sustainable travel plan team with local employers to try and ensure that they adopt similar facilities for their staff as well. And indeed, my understanding of that program is that there is a great deal of interest, and has been for the last few years, in providing that in recognition of the issues that Councillor Kavanagh described. So I think the simple answer to that is yes.
Very good, thank you. Councillor Holdsworth.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that one of the issues that concerns me, thinking of the West Vale area, is that over the last few years, it has become a very vibrant centre. It is poor for parking, and my worry is that if there's an increase or an extension of car parking charges until 8 in the evening, people will be tempted to come into West Vale and park on the back streets, which are free. They're not permit holder only for residents, and cause irritation to residents, other users walking on the pavements, this sort of thing. And this is going to be problematic. The other concern is that it's fine to suggest using public transport, but public transport tends to close down in terms of the last bus, say from Ripponden through West Vale to Halifax, by about 11 o'clock at night, when most people who've gone out for the night don't want to go home at that time. So then there's the reliance on taxis, which at the moment people are nervous about going into, plus thinking about COVID-19, as Councillor Taylor was saying, the severe limitation of the numbers of people that can be carried on either a double or a single decker bus. So I do think that we might need to rethink the implementation of these charges until such a time as we do approach something closer to normality.
I think that's an interesting point about the wider ramifications of parking charges, especially on local residents. Officers, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, I just will briefly. I'm sure Stephen will probably want to say something as well, but absolutely. I mean, displacement is always an issue. You know, we get this all the time, and that's really Stephen's part of the service deals with the sort of resident parking schemes. You know, my side of things is more about the operational parking issues, but we try and work closely together to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences of the nature that Councillor Holdsworth is probably describing. The only problem with that is if we took the approach that, well, it's always going to displace a problem somewhere else, we'd end up never doing anything. So what we will certainly be doing in West Vale and indeed other areas, because we do have displacement in Halifax, for example, creeping up into the Booth Town area, where we're getting a lot of conflict with residents up there, is we need to monitor the situation, and then, as I say, working with Stephen's service, look at the possibility of introducing resident permit schemes, because one of the things that the extension of charges into the evening will bring with it is enforcement activity. So obviously there will be excuse me, civil enforcement officers active in the area who will be monitoring what is going on. So even though they won't be able to necessarily deal with any of the issues there and then, in terms of people maybe being displaced in resident areas, we will have that feedback from both our staff and I'm sure from local residents. And I think we will then need to look to act accordingly to control that. But it is a very fair point, and it's something that, you know, is always a challenge with parking charges.
Very good. Councillor A. Smith.
Can I just say thanks ever so much for the report and for all the questions that you've answered already. I think it's really, really interesting, and I love trying to understand more about the actual strategy. The one comment I did want to make was, you talked about the we talked briefly in our correspondence beforehand about the commercialisation opportunity of using Broad Street multi-storey, and I just thought, in the strategy, what how are you working with private providers to look at overall parking spaces and how we can best utilize them? Because really parking, you know, as you said, Stephen, I think, and Andrew, that there are enough parking spaces, they're just not in the right places. And maybe people need more than a nudge to move away from this idea that they can park right outside the shop. And you know, there is a multi-storey, there is Sainsbury's car park, there are various council car parks around the peripheries. And I think, you know, I think, why is the strategy not harsher, I suppose? And what are the commercial opportunities available now, maybe post-COVID, with the Broad Street Plaza? Because you know, occupation of that will be lower than it was.
Yeah, officers.
Yeah, I mean, I can pick up on a couple of those points, and then if Andrew wants to add something further, that will be fine. I mean, Broad Street Plaza car park, yes, it is an available car park. We've been offered the lease on that before, and the income that it generates wouldn't be enough to cover our costs. Now, that shouldn't necessarily be a reason not to do something, but nonetheless, it is a very important aspect. We've also looked at whether or not we should build our own multi-storey car park to replace the multi-storey car parks that we've previously demolished. One of the issues that you've got with a multi-storey car park is that you get a greater concentration of car parking spaces, but the capital costs associated with building a multi-storey car park make a very difficult, given the level of car parking charges that we charge within Halifax itself and within Calderdale. The other things to think about in the wider gamut is that multi-storey car parks aren't necessarily particularly green. They have a small footprint, but they're quite high. But they're not necessarily green in as much as they collect rainwater, and the rainwater goes into a drainage system, as opposed to being able to soak into the ground. And they also use electricity. They use electricity for the lighting, they use electricity for the lifts, and they use electricity for the charging point. So it's not necessarily the greenest option. However, to counter that, what we're currently trying to look at is whether or not we could introduce a green multi-storey car park to facilitate the use of electric vehicles. In other words, a multi-storey car park that has a deal of electric car charging points in, which will improve our offer to electric car users and make the use of electric cars a lot more palatable. And we'll look at various mechanisms in which way we might achieve that. But as I said, on the whole, within Halifax, multi-storey car parks, in terms of washing their face financially, are very difficult to achieve. Andrew, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Just very briefly, Chair, and just going back to the issue that Councillor Kavanagh raised about, you know, forcing people out onto the periphery, which is, you know, where often the bigger car parks tend to be, whether they be multi-storey or not. I think there are a number of advantages there, both for the individual, because often if people are parking further away from town centres, they are going into that town centre, so that they're being more active. They are walking a longer distance rather than necessarily parking outside the shop. But it also has the advantage of not having cars in town centres circling looking for parking spaces, with the consequent effects on air quality in the town centre, and indeed the potential for pedestrian vehicle conflict. So there certainly is something in the idea of recognising that, you know, for the foreseeable future, there's going to be a need for people to be able to park their cars somewhere. But should we be moving to try and get those people to be more on the outskirts of the town centres, leaving town centres open for pedestrians and obviously for loading deliveries and for disabled drivers, because clearly we need to take account of people who may well have mobility impairments and are not able to walk from peripheral car parks in the way that I described. So I think it's a good discussion point, and it's something that I think we're well aware of in Calderdale, and indeed, you know, other areas in the country are discussing exactly the same things.
Thank you. I've still got 2 councillors to go. It's 7:15, so it is getting a bit late now. But Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that I spoke on this at the Cabinet meeting recently, and I was pleased that they agreed that they should send this out for further consultation and discussion, because it is a thing that I've been used to hearing at Place Scrutiny. It's something that always causes arguments. And whilst I agree that we have to have control of car parking and we have to put the prices up from time to time, my problem right now is that I think it's the wrong thing to do at this time. I think that the businesses in the high street are in very serious trouble right now. And what we need in the town centres is to encourage people to come in. And I think that we ought to defer these increases until the end of this calendar year to take into account the very quickly changing situation regarding COVID and the difficulty in making progress with strategies at a time when businesses are failing, particularly in the high street. Thank you.
Very good. I don't know if officers want to come back to that on those points. No. Oh, Councillor Taylor.
Very, very briefly, walking and cycling is very hard for me. Has anyone heard of degeneration spondylosis? No. It basically means that my lumbar region muscles are degenerating. So I can't stand for a long time. I'd love to cycle, I'd love to walk, but can we accept that not everybody can? Which is why I'm concerned. I don't have a problem with parking charges. I think about 15, 20 years ago, Councillor John Ford, or former Councillor John Ford, who was leader, said about a third of our population in Calderdale don't have a car. They just don't have one. My mother never had one. So their only alternative is the bus or cycling or walking. So I don't have a problem with that. My only concern with increasing charges till 8 p.m. is the evening economy. We need not only the daytime economy, we need the evening economy. And I would beg that it's not taken right up to 2200 hours or 8 p.m. or no, I'm 22 10 here, never mind. You know where I'm coming from. But I do understand that we need to charge people to park because there are so many people coming to our town centres, our villages and our places like Hebden Bridge who don't actually have a four-wheel vehicle. And those who have a four-wheel vehicle, I believe, should pay for it. I hope that hasn't made any nonsense, but that's me finished. Thank you, Chairman.
No problem. I think officers, just noting that comment. Okay. Right now, Councillor Fenton Glynn, you want to come in. I want to finish this item really quickly, please.
Just quickly on the last couple of points. I understand Stephen's concern about when the right time is, but I also understand that there just never is a right time if you're looking for that, because, you know, we've been through so much recently, and, you know, we don't want to do it around Christmas, we don't want to do it around the floods. And actually, when it comes down to it, you know, we have to be bigger than that. We have to say, we've got to make the decisions that we think will put our town centres on the right footing moving forward, and that's what this is. In terms of Roger's issue, I mean, I hope that, you know, we are mindful of the equality impacts of this, and that, you know, people with blue badges and so forth will still be able to park, and you know, won't see that, you know, if they need to use their car, they won't have that impacted. But actually, I think, you know, the nighttime economy, I mean, what is it for an hour in Hebden Bridge? 60p in the most expensive car park now. The last night out I spent considerably more than 60 pence. And so I think, you know, we've got to kind of put it in a certain amount of perspective there. And I think, you know, when we're looking at it, you know, it's not something anyone wants to do, but I think as a board, we should note the comments. We should also just kind of, you know, just say that we want to see our town centres put on a sensible footing that allows traffic throughput and allows people to actually use the shops and not be blocked by cars that are there.
Okay, thank you. And then final thing from Mike.
Thank you, Chair. It's only very brief. Tomorrow morning, the West Yorkshire Combined Authority Transport Committee meets. Councillor Caffrey is a member of that. This relates perhaps to your previous discussion as well, and your broader discussion about transport. There are some interesting papers on that meeting's agenda about rail strategy and the impact of COVID on transport. And I think they're well worth members perhaps having a quick look at, or even watching the meeting at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Very good, thank you. Final comment from me, it's not a question. I'd just like officers to take into account the impact of COVID on the high street. I'm very concerned, not only because shops have had a decrease in revenue, but also because consumer shopping habits are going to change. You know, people have been introduced to Amazon like never before. So I would like that to be taken into consideration with this consultation. But thank you, officers. Car parking charge is always an interesting issue to discuss. But thank you for your time. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you, Andrew. Right, and then Sarah, Zora, Councillor Press, the next item, and Councillor Scullion, the next item is work plan. You know, so if you are going to log off now, thank you for joining us. Thank you. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So work programme we've got there. Mike, over to you.
I'll be as brief as I can, Chair. And I should have said right at the beginning that normally Alex Hunter would be taking this item, but he's had a bereavement in the family, so he's away from work for a couple of days. So that's the reason that Alex isn't here, and he sends his apologies. I just wanted to mention three particular things, one of which perhaps Councillor Robinson may come back in. One of the things that I think your work programme is a bit light on is the sort of the crime and disorder side of things. You do have to sit as a crime and disorder committee once a year, and I've not got any particular suggestions, but I do know that the COVID impact assessment that Mark Cole was talking about earlier on, that does have some things about both crime rates in terms of acquisitive crime and hate crime, and some other things that are being monitored around COVID. And it may be worthwhile perhaps Councillor Robinson and Councillor Fenton Glynn in their monthly discussions having a brief discussion about how we can pick up on some of the crime and disorder aspects that fall within your remit, because that just feels a bit light in your work programme. In those discussions between the chair and the deputy chair, and I think some of these discussions have gone a little bit wider, there was some talk about whether you wanted to establish a little subgroup of members to look at the equalities impact of COVID. You've got it in the work programme for October, but I think there was some thought that you might want to think about having a little group of members looking at that, and those members reporting back in October. And if the board is up for that proposal, then myself and Alex and Councillor Robinson outside the meeting can think in terms of reference and talk about membership outside the meeting, if that's what you want. And the third thing to mention, and I think Councillor Robinson may want to come in, but one suggestion for the work programme that perhaps isn't covered very much is house building. I know Councillor Robinson's been involved in a discussion about that.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Regarding the police and crime, all that element, yeah, Josh and myself, we can have a discussion about that. I think it needs to be a separate or a meeting. It can be a themed meeting, I suppose. That's the way forward there. But yeah, it's within our remit, so we need to discuss. The point about house building, I had a conversation with Councillor Scullion the other day, and she touched on our work programme's a bit light on house building. And of course, house building isn't just, I'll take you in a minute, Brian. House building's not just about the local plan. It's about, you know, bungalows. It's about social need. It's about reconstructing. It's about design. You know, it's about the future of sale. There's so much to do with it. It's a broad remit, and I think Councillor Scullion has got a point there. The final thing from me is, I had a conversation, like I say, with Councillor Scullion, and the recycling centres now. You'll have received loads of emails. I've received loads of emails about recycling centres. The problem with this is, obviously, people want us to review the recycling centres because it's within our remit. The issue is that it's a moving feast at the moment. If we end up bringing it to a scrutiny meeting, the situation might have changed in the interim, or we might bring it to a scrutiny meeting to which, say, you know, the administration will say, oh, well, we are going to go back to usual. It's just a matter of time, you know, and we don't want to review stuff which is unnecessary. So what I'm proposing, and Councillor Scullion agreed to this, is if we form a group or some written questions, you know, so after this meeting, if you're concerned about it, you can send us written questions, send me written questions and CC Mike in. I'll ask other councillors to do that as well. And Councillor Scullion and officers will provide a written response to that. And then we can discuss the written response at a scrutiny meeting rather than having an oral discussion. So I think that's the best way forward. But I'll open it up to you guys. Councillor Brian Smith. You're on mute, Brian.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Around the crime and disorder report, could we have some information around enforcement and some figures with regard to fly tipping and whether there's been any enforcement on that, dog fouling, various other things, which is one of the blights of this COVID-19 and the community in general.
I totally agree, Brian. We've got that actually. The enforcement for fly tipping is a council thing, and we've got that coming up on the agenda. We've already got that incorporated into the work programme, so I've got you back.
Right, yeah, but I'm thinking about the other things. We employed 2 years ago. We employed a number of enforcement officers to deal with such as fly tipping, such as dog fouling and various other things, and we've never had any information as to what success or failures they've had during that 2 years. You know, the first 6 months are all about training, and the second 6 months, some of the information I've received back at walk forums and the Safer, Greener, Cleaner meetings has been quite negative. And I'd like to understand what successes they've had over the last 18 months. We've never had a report from Derek Penn.
I'll tell you what, Brian. We'll make Mike. Can you make a note of that, and we'll incorporate it somehow. If it is a police, I don't think it is a police issue. Well, it probably is. I don't know. But we'll incorporate it somehow. How does that sound, Brian?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Perfect. Councillors, anyone else? Any more for any more? No. How do you feel on the recycling proposal about outside of the meeting providing written questions for officers and councillors to provide written responses to? Yeah, good. Right. In that case, Mike, final words?
just we'll go ahead and send some emails out about those things, and in particular about the equalities work.
Yeah. We'll form a task and finish group for that. And also thank you to Kirsty. She's been in the wings. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And welcome to place.
Thank you.
Right, councillors, meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you.